From trigger investigation to likelihood of another stroke, number 1540, VPT 093, February 18, 2026, Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation, category stroke. Preface: since there is very little I can do to reverse my cerebral vascular calcification, which was formed during my past 36 years of type 2 diabetes, my strategy must now be forward-looking rather than restorative. The priority is to avoid another acute hypertensive trigger. That is why I began measuring my blood pressure 20 to 24 times each day, so that acute spikes can be detected early and suppressed before they reach a dangerous level. I had my first stroke on June 21, 2025 and was hospitalized for 7 days because the stroke was followed by multiple seizures. Starting from the 2nd of August 2025, I began measuring my blood pressure 20 to 24 times each day. After each measurement, I also calculated 3 additional biomarkers: pulse pressure PP equals SBP/dBP, which indicates vascular stiffness; mean arterial pressure MAP equals dBP plus PP3, which reflects the mechanical pressure generated by blood flow that carries oxygen, glucose, and nutrients to the organs; SBP spike, defined as the highest SBP minus the average SBP. This value was not available prior to the 2nd of August 2025, because I only measured my blood pressure once a day at that time. Thus far, I have collected about 30,000 blood pressure-related data points during past 6.5 months for protecting my own life. This paper does not focus on reversal of structural damage. Since I cannot push the clock back to 36 years ago, I cannot look backward, but I can definitely use my previously learned knowledge to move forward. Therefore, I decided to focus on preventing another high trigger sensitivity index TSI state that can lead to another stroke. In my framework, vascular calcification defines a largely fixed mechanical boundary that is almost irreversible. However, tight daily blood pressure management can help my cerebral vascular system remain inside a safe zone. For this reason, I introduce a trigger sensitivity index TSI as the output strain for a viscoplastopology VPT research model, using BP magnitude, MAP magnitude, and fasting plasma glucose in the early morning FPG as the 3 input stressors. The purpose is not to predict the exact day of another stroke like a fortune teller, but to define personal operating conditions under which the likelihood of a stroke triggering event can be minimized. Most stroke papers answer the question, who is more likely to have a stroke in 5 to 10 years? My paper answers a completely different question: how does one individual system move month by month into a high instability state, and how can it be pushed back into a safe zone? My key observations: TSI diagrams show state, not prophecy or prediction. The central finding of this study is that a stroke should not be framed as bad luck or as a random isolated incident when the body has already entered a high sensitivity state. A triggering event is real, sudden, and oftentimes uncertain. However, the structural instability that makes a trigger dangerous usually develops over months and years. A useful model should therefore focus on identifying when the system is drifting into an unstable band, rather than claiming the ability to forecast a specific incident date. First of all, let me define TSI as the normalized PP multiplied by the normalized SBP, trigger sensitivity index TSI, equals PP 45 SBP 120 100. The amplification factor of 100 is used only to make the values easier to see and interpret, instead of working with small normalized decimals. My longitudinal TSI charts provide exactly this type of stability signal. The long-term trajectory from 2014 to 2026 is not noisy. It shows 3 clear phases. First, a relatively low and stable base in 2015 to 2017. Second, a gradual rise consistent with cumulative instability building 2018 to 2022. Third, a high strain plateau followed by rollover 2023 to 2025. This pattern matches what an engineer, such as myself trained at MIT in the early 1970s, would expect from a viscoplastic or structural fatigue system. Repeated loading slowly reduces the safety margin and makes the system more sensitive to transient overload. The 90-day moving average chart 2024 to 2026 is the strongest clinical signal, although very few clinicians have the opportunity to see this kind of high-density, patient-specific trajectory. It shows a sustained rise through 2024, a TSI increase beginning around late 2024 and early 2025, reaching a peak around mid-2025, and then a sharp drop after my hemorrhagic stroke on June 21, 2025. followed by a new lower and more stable band until today, February 18, 2026. This pattern shows 3 steps: pressure load built up for months, the vessel finally ruptured. And after the stroke, the curve dropped and stayed lower because I changed my daily behavior and controlled my daily blood pressures. These diagrams are not fortune teller curves. They are dynamic stability gauges. Data interpretation: chronic diabetes-caused vascular calcification sets the stage, SBP spike triggers the stroke. The second key insight is the separation of 2 mechanisms that are often mixed together in routine clinical thinking. Chronic vascular damage, such as diabetes-induced calcification through FPG dataset, determines the fragility of my brain vessels. But the transient SBP spikes determine the timing of the catastrophic event, such as stroke. My stroke on June 21, 2025 is best interpreted as a trigger acting on a system that had already entered a high sensitivity and dangerous state, rather than being the result of a single short-term cause. This separation is not merely philosophical, it changes how daily prevention should be practiced. If the dominant danger is spike-driven, then the core defense is not only lowering baseline blood pressure, but also aggressively suppressing transient surges before they cross a personal instability threshold. This is why I focus on SBP spike amplitude and perform 20 to 24 BP measurements per day, instead of relying on occasional clinic readings. A practical behavioral confirmation: the curve changed after intervention. A third observation strengthens this mechanistic interpretation: the TSI curve changed after my behavioral intervention. After June of 2025, I paid special attention to avoiding stressful events and to suppressing BP surges using deliberate breathing control. Inhale about 4 seconds, exhale about 8 seconds, and repeat at least 4 to 5 rounds. Combined with immediate self-monitoring, this breathing method tells the body to slow the heart and lower the pressure inside the blood vessels. It is also aligned with my personal goal: reduce SBP spike amplitude and slow the rate of my TSI instability growth. The key point is not that breathing is a cure for calcification. The key point is that the stroke-triggering signal TSI responded after I changed my daily operating conditions. That response indicates that my daily stroke prevention model is actionable and mechanistic, not merely descriptive. It also supports my interpretation that my hypertension behavior was not purely a chronic condition, but had an important emotional trigger component that expressed itself as transient overload. The structural boundary did not improve, but the load path changed. Clinical meaning: stable is not the same as normal. Routine medicine tends to ask, "Are you normal?" Post-stroke reality asks a different question: "Are you stable?" My current goal is not to return to a pre-damage state, but to remain functionally stable inside a constrained operating envelope. This creates a more honest survival logic for an aging and structurally damaged vascular system. Stability is a managed condition maintained by daily multiple BP measurements, determination, discipline, and rapid SBP spike suppression. Most neurology clinicians do not have patient-specific 90-day moving average instability titragation for their patients, largely because continuous high-density self-tracking rarely exists in routine care. In addition, most patients do not have the knowledge, tools, or daily discipline required to collect this type of dataset. This paper argues that such trajectories can add a new and practical layer of prevention by identifying high stroke sensitivity states and guiding daily actions that preserve the remaining safety margin. Conclusion and forward guidance. This study supports 3 conclusions. First, TSI can serve as a personal stroke prevention and stability signal that identifies high sensitivity states without pretending to predict the exact date of a stroke. Second, my stroke on June 21, 2025 is consistent with a trigger acting on a system that had already entered an unstable band, with clear evidence of a sustained rise beginning around late 2024. Third, after the stroke on June 21, 2025, the shift to intensive self-monitoring and spike suppression behavior was followed by a lower and more stable TSI band, indicating that controlling transient overload can materially reduce instability even when underlying structural damage, such as brain microvascular calcification, remains. In short, this is not stroke prediction, it is stroke avoidance through stability monitoring based on standard SBP and DBP data, together with tight control of pulse pressure PP and stroke-triggering conditions expressed by TSI values and their trajectory. The EMT research method to convert both the pre-stroke data collection and the more detailed post-stroke monitoring into forward guidance. I structured the dataset into 2 time bins, 13 annual intervals and 9 quarterly intervals, both Analyses use the same single output strain C and the same three input stressors PP, MAP, and FPG. The analysis workflow includes data collection and cleaning, normalization to fixed reference values, and aggregation into two consistent time structures. The first structure covers 13 years from 2014 through 2026. And the second covers 9 quarters from 2020 for Q1 through 2026 Q1. For each dataset, I calculated the enclosed area beneath the curve of strain versus each individual stressor using calculus. This approach reduces noise while preserving the P-trigger behavior that is essential for stroke mechanism analysis. The calculated areas were then interpreted as VMT energy in order to quantify how each stressor contributes to changes in the TSI strain signal. The objective of these two VMT analyses is to derive a personal safe operating zone, expressed as practical boundaries for the strain and the three stressors. These boundaries can be used as daily operational guidelines to reduce the likelihood of another hypertensive triggered stroke. VMT analysis results and illustrations. The VMT results are fully consistent with the TSI time series observations. Both the annual dataset 2014-2026 and the high-density quarterly dataset for Q1-6 Q1 identify 2024-2025, and particularly the period around mid-2025, as the highest TSI intensity zone. This confirms that my stroke on June 21, 2025 did not occur as an isolated event. It occurred at the peak of a sustained instability buildup that had already been developing for months or years. The cumulative VMT energy curves provide the clearest visualization of this process. In both time windows, the steepest rise in cumulative energy is concentrated in the 2024 to 2025 period. In mechanical terms, this represents rapid loss of safety margin. In clinical terms, it represents entry into a high trigger sensitivity state. Another important finding is the shift in energy contribution among the three stressors. In the long-term annual window 2014-2026, the VMT energy contribution ratios are FPG 37.9%, MAP 31.4%, 30.7%. This indicates that fasting plasma glucose is the dominant driver over the long run. This result is consistent with the known pathophysiology of type 2 diabetes. Chronic hyperglycemia leads to vascular calcification and loss of elasticity, which defines the structural fragility of the cerebral vessels. In the VPT framework, FPG represents the long-term material deterioration term. In the recent quarterly high-risk window for Q1 to 6 Q1, the energy contribution changes to PP 34.2%, MAP 33.9%, FPG 31.9%. This redistribution of energy is another key dynamic finding during the period immediately surrounding the stroke. The dominant factors are no longer metabolic 32%. They are hemodynamic 68%. Pulse pressure and mean arterial pressure become the primary drivers of instability. This means that once the structural fragility has been established by long-term diabetes, the short-term progression toward rupture is governed mainly by blood pressure load and vascular stiffness. In simple cause and effect terms, long-term FPG created the fragile vessel. High PP and high MAP pushed the system into the danger zone. The acute SBP spike provided the final rupture load. This sequence is fully consistent with the TSI trajectory, which shows a sustained rise beginning in late 2024, reaching its maximum in 2025, and then dropping into a lower and more stable band after I changed my daily blood pressure monitoring and control behavior. The post-stroke phase provides practical validation off-model. After intensive self-monitoring and active suppression of SBP spikes, the TSI level decreased and remained in a lower band, and the cumulative energy curve flattened. This indicates that the system moved from an accelerating instability state into a controlled operating state. The structural boundary did not reverse, but the operational load was reduced. Conclusions: these VMT results lead to a clear and actionable clinical strategy. FPG control remains essential for slowing further structural deterioration. However, in the short and medium term, the dominant controllable factors for stroke avoidance are PP and MAP. Because these two variables are directly derived from SBP and DBP, frequent home blood pressure measurement combined with TSI trajectory monitoring provides a practical daily control tool. In summary, the VMT analysis converts the stroke from a past event into a measurable and controllable system state. It identifies the period of highest instability, quantifies the relative roles of metabolic and hemodynamic stressors, and defines a clear direction for long-term stability management. Disclaimer: I write this paper not for fame, but to share what I have learned so others can understand their health, prevent disease, and live longer, healthier lives. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C.